Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. In my last video, we saw how we can create different sets of data tables and how we can pass the values from those data tables. We also saw how we can fetch those values inside our step definitions using the data table object. Now, in this video, we are going to see how we can fetch the data table information using a class object. So for that, what I'm going to do first is I'll add a new class. Let's name the class as user details. Now in this class, we need to create properties for all the fields that we have in the data table. First, we'll work with vertical tables where we have single values for each field. We'll see how we can retrieve those values using a class object. Later in the video, we'll move on to the horizontal rows with multiple values. So in the user details class, I'll start adding the properties. If I look at our data table, then we have the following fields: first name, last name, age, and gender. So I'll create the corresponding properties. So now we have created all four properties in the user details class. Please make sure that when you define the data types for those properties, the same value type should be passed from the feature file. For example, if you define age as an integer but pass a string from the feature file, it will throw an exception. Now we have created the class with all the necessary fields. Let's go back to the step definition. You can see this is the code we used earlier to fetch values using data table. And I'm going to comment out that code for now. Instead, I'll write the new code using the class object. This create instance method will automatically map values from the data table into the user details class. Since we are dealing with a single set of values, we don't need a loop right now. Now, instead of using a data row object, I'm going to use the user details object to access the values directly. And I'm going to print them out. So let me change the object data table object with the user details object in all the console method. Now let's debug the test to see how it reads the values. Now you can see the debugger hits the breakpoint. If I step through, you will see user details dot first name is maximum and last name is automation. User details dot age is 30 and the value for gender is male. So this is how we get values from the feature files data table into our step definition mapped automatically to class properties. Let me show you one more thing. If I add an extra property in the class, for example, let me add the properties for this field, and then I'll try to access it. You'll see that the value for field is null because it was not provided in the data table. This shows that the first row in vertical table is always ignored. And if a value is not present in the data table, the corresponding property will remain null. So this is how you can read values from vertical tables using a class object. Now let's talk about horizontal tables, where we have multiple rows with values. In this case, we need to iterate through each row because each row represents one object. So I'm going to comment out the previous code and uncomment the code for horizontal tables. This time, instead of using create instance, we'll use create set. Create set returns an INumerable object, which means we can loop through it. So now here I'm going to add a for each loop so that we can loop through each row we have available in our user information object. Let's remove the unused field property from the class to avoid getting nulls for fields that don't exist in the table. Let's debug it again. You'll see in the debugger that user info contains two rows, meaning two sets of data. The first loop iteration shows first name as maximum, last name is automation, then age 30. Then in the second iteration, we get the name as Marcus, last name as Holt. So the create set method helps us easily map multiple rows of data to a class and iterate through them. Now let's look at another way of reading data, using value tuples. Previously, we passed the class object to create set. This time, we'll pass a tuple instead. For example, if I replace the class object from here, and then I'm going to provide the tuple values directly inside the create set method. So as we have 4 fields available in our data table, so I'm going to add 4 value tuples in this create set method. Let's run this code and step through it. You'll see the values are coming in correctly. Tuples work just like class properties, but with one limitation. If you add an extra field in the feature file that is not defined in the tuple, let me show you what happens if I add a middle name column to the data table, but don't update the tuple. When I debug, then you can see all the values, including first name, last name, age, and gender, coming as null. This is because tuples don't use property names at runtime. They use positions and type. So the number of fields and their types must exactly match the structure in the feature file. Also, you can only use up to 7 fields in a tuple. If your data has more than 7 fields, you should use a class instead. Tuples are good for quick small data sets, but for more flexibility and safety, use a class object. Let's go back and try this with the class object now. This time, we'll add a middle name property to the user details class. Now, when we run the test, even if the middle name value is not present in the feature file, the rest of the values will still map correctly. You'll see the first name value is maximum. You can see the middle name value is null because we have not provided any value for middle name from the feature file. That's why the value for this property is coming as null. But here we can see the last name, age, and gender value is coming. So that's the beauty of using a class object. It gracefully handles the missing fields. So to summarize, use create instance for vertical tables, use create set for horizontal tables, use value tuples for small or fixed datasets, and you should prefer class objects when working with larger or flexible datasets. I hope you like this video. Please leave your questions and comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you.